For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant, ignored by the galaxy, dismissed by those in power, barely tolerated when they were useful, and quietly resented when they were not. To the Galactic Council, humans were an inconvenience wrapped in ambition. Too emotional, too argumentative, too unwilling to accept the natural order of ancient species ruling younger ones. Humanity questioned everything: laws, borders, authority itself, and that alone made them dangerous in a way fleets never were. But dangerous didn't mean powerful. Human technology lagged behind the great powers. Their fleets were serviceable, not impressive. Their political structure was fractured, inefficient, endlessly debated. To the Council's analysts, humanity was a species that might one day become a problem, but only if the galaxy made the mistake of letting them grow unchecked. So when humanity began to fade from interstellar space, the Council felt relief. Trade routes once crowded with human merchants fell quiet. Diplomatic channels went unanswered. Colonies withdrew from shared infrastructure. Human systems stopped participating in Council affairs, their representatives vanishing from chambers where they had never quite belonged. Then came the silence. Humanity disappeared. No distress calls. No declarations. No dramatic last stand. Just absence. The Council celebrated, quietly at first, then openly. Analysts published papers declaring humanity a failed experiment. Politicians spoke of stability restored. Younger species were shown humanity's rise and fall as a lesson in overreach. This is what happens, they were told, when a species refuses guidance. Files were closed. Monitoring stations reassigned. No fleets were sent to confirm extinction, because extinction was assumed. After all, civilizations didn't vanish without leaving ruins, unless they had collapsed inward, tearing themselves apart in isolation. And humanity, everyone agreed, was very good at tearing itself apart. The galaxy moved on. New trade alliances formed. Borders shifted. Council influence expanded into former human-adjacent space without resistance. Humanity became a footnote, a cautionary tale cited in lectures and strategy briefings. No one asked where the billions had gone. No one questioned the strange sensor anomalies flickering at the edge of mapped space. Massive objects moving where no lanes existed, energy readings that refused classification. Those were labeled glitches, cosmic noise, equipment decay. Easier not to look. What the Council never understood was that humanity had not disappeared because it was weak. It disappeared because it learned. Humans had finally understood a truth the galaxy never taught its younger species. Dependence is vulnerability. So they stopped depending. They dismantled systems that could be sanctioned, abandoned routes that could be controlled, rebuilt their civilization inward, away from prying sensors and political chokeholds. They stopped performing for the galaxy's approval and started preparing for a universe that offered none. The silence was not collapse. It was focus. While the Council congratulated itself, humanity was learning how to survive without permission, how to build without trade, how to move without lanes, how to endure without allies. By the time the first Council listening post went dark without explanation, celebration turned to confusion. By the time entire sectors reported impossible readings, confusion turned to unease. And when a single transmission finally cut across every known channel, clear, calm, unmistakably human, the Galactic Council realized, far too late, what their celebration had truly marked. Humanity had not vanished. They had stepped off the board. And whatever returned from that silence would not be the weak, insignificant species the galaxy remembered, but something shaped by absence, patience, and the quiet determination of a people who had learned never to rely on anyone else again. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. They called it stabilization, risk mitigation, preventive governance. The language was careful, polished, and deliberately dull, meant to disguise how absolute the measures truly were. Trade was cut. Human shipping licenses were suspended, pending compliance reviews. Entire categories of goods were quietly reclassified as restricted: reactor components, medical compounds, navigation cores. Dockyards delayed human vessels until fuel reserves ran thin. Contracts were frozen. Credit lines locked behind layers of bureaucratic approval that never came. Within months, Supply chains that had taken generations to build were severed. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost voting privileges in council chambers. Then speaking privileges. Then access altogether. Travel permits were restricted. Surveillance mandates imposed. Council law, ancient, flexible, and selectively enforced, was suddenly applied with ruthless precision. Every measure was legal. Every restriction justified. Every protest ignored. Humanity appealed through the channels the Council demanded they use. They cited treaties signed in good faith. Mutual defense clauses. Shared wars. Shared losses. Human fleets had bled alongside Council armadas. Human engineers had rebuilt shattered worlds that were not their own. The Council acknowledged the filings. Then archived them. Sanctions tightened further. Insurance guilds raised transit costs until civilian travel became impossible. Navigation beacons along human routes went dark for maintenance. Communication relays began to lag, then fail, as service contracts were quietly terminated. Humanity was pushed into isolation. And the Council watched closely. They expected the familiar pattern. Economic fracture. Political infighting. Colonies turning on one another as resources dwindled. Refugees flooding outward, begging for reinstatement. Eventually, collapse. They had seen it countless times. A species dependent on interstellar trade could not survive without it. A fractured civilization could not endure sustained pressure. Humanity, with all its contradictions and internal rivalries, should have shattered quickly. It didn't. Months passed. Then years. There were no mass distress calls. No refugee waves. No desperate broadcasts pleading for mercy. Traffic didn't explode outward in panic. It redirected inward, with eerie coordination. Peripheral colonies, once dismissed as marginal, suddenly became centers of activity. Council analysts flagged the data as anomalous. Supervisors dismissed it. They assumed humanity was burning through reserves in a final, desperate effort to delay the inevitable. Dying civilizations often appeared productive just before the end. It fit precedent. It fit expectation. Then human space went quiet. Not the chaotic silence of collapse, but something deliberate. No broadcasts. No demands. No threats. No pleas. To the Council, that silence meant confirmation. Finished. Monitoring files were closed. Observers reassigned. Humanity was quietly reclassified as a non-viable civilization, a footnote added to a long list of species that had failed to adapt to galactic order. The Council celebrated. They spoke of restored stability, of a problem resolved without bloodshed. Humanity became a lesson taught to younger species. This is what happens when you resist guidance. No one asked why human industrial output had spiked before the silence. No one questioned why energy readings rose instead of fell. No one wondered why a collapsing species stopped asking for help altogether. They never considered that humanity might have reached a conclusion of its own. That dependence was weakness. That permission was a vulnerability. That survival meant removing every system that could be taken away. The Council believed isolation was a punishment. For humanity, it was a purge. Every sanction burned away reliance. Every revoked right stripped illusion. Every closed door forced reinvention. The Council expected collapse. What they created instead was a civilization no longer entangled in the galaxy's fragile systems of control, and therefore no longer subject to them. By the time the Council realized the silence wasn't death, humanity had already learned how to survive without being seen. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the loss was disorienting. Trade vanished. Communications failed. Long-standing guarantees evaporated overnight. For a species accustomed to arguing beneath a shared sky, the sudden realization that the galaxy had turned away was a shock that echoed across every human world. Then came understanding. No one was coming. For centuries, humanity had carried its old fractures into space. Nations reborn as colonies. Corporate blocs wielding more power than governments. Ideologies transplanted whole onto planets that had never known Earth. Those divisions survived because the galaxy tolerated them, because trade softened consequences and council oversight absorbed the cost of failure. Isolation stripped that protection away. When shipments stopped, politics didn't matter. When jump lanes closed, borders meant nothing. When council patrols failed to respond to distress calls, denial gave way to clarity. Division was no longer inefficient. It was fatal. Old divisions vanished, not through revolution, but necessity. Arguments that once took decades were resolved in days. Sometimes hours. Not by force, but by consensus shaped by survival. You either worked together, or you didn't survive. Emergency assemblies formed across human space. Not parliaments. Not senates. Coordination councils. They were led not by politicians, but by people who understood systems. Logisticians who kept supply chains alive, engineers who knew what failed first under stress, medics who understood what shortages actually killed people. The questions were brutally simple. How do we feed everyone? How do we keep power stable? How do we make sure no colony stands alone? Corporations resisted at first. Profit models collapsed without external markets. Some attempted hoarding. They were outpaced, quickly, by cooperative networks that shared materials and data freely, producing more with less waste. Profit was replaced with continuity. Military forces followed. Fleets that once answered to different flags began operating together out of necessity. Joint patrols became shared commands. Shared commands became permanent structures. Uniforms lost national insignia. Ship hulls lost ownership markings. Culture remained. Identity remained. Authority changed. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't declared. It wasn't voted on. It emerged. Command was not a government. It did not dictate belief, language, or culture. It coordinated survival. When command issued a directive, it was followed, not out of loyalty, but because it worked. Power grids synchronized. Food production stabilized. Manufacturing standards unified. A ship built in one system could be repaired in another without modification. Medical protocols standardized across worlds. Mortality rates dropped even as resources tightened. Humanity stopped functioning like competing states. They started functioning like a single organism. Education changed almost overnight. Children learned systems thinking before history. Emergency response before politics. Every human learned a practical skill: fabrication, repair, medicine, logistics. Knowing how to keep something running became as fundamental as language. This was not militarization. It was preparation. Because if no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Defense replaced borders. Early warning arrays extended far beyond known maps, watching vectors no council doctrine had ever considered threats. Humanity assumed betrayal as a baseline. They assumed isolation would return. They assumed help would not arrive in time. So they built accordingly. The galaxy never noticed. Council observers had been reassigned. Sensor coverage reduced. Reports hinting at unusual coordination were buried under bureaucracy or dismissed as noise. Humanity faded from relevance exactly as the Council expected. And humanity did nothing to correct that assumption. They had learned the value of being underestimated. While the Council congratulated itself on a problem solved, human space grew quieter and stronger. Colonies once separated by light years functioned like neighboring districts. Decisions that once took generations were made in days. Not through tyranny. Through shared responsibility. Isolation had done what centuries of diplomacy never could. It removed the illusion that someone else would step in. In its place, humanity built unity not from ideology, but necessity. Not from fear of authority, but trust in one another. And when the galaxy finally turned its attention back toward human space, it would not find a fractured species begging for reintegration. It would find a civilization that had already learned the lesson the universe teaches to all who survive long enough. If no one else will stand for you, you learn to stand together. In silence, humanity evolved. Cut off from the galaxy's noise, human space did not stagnate, it sharpened. Without markets to impress or rivals to intimidate, innovation shed ceremony and focused on function. Every design decision revolved around one question. Will this still work when we are alone? New engines came first. Humanity abandoned the galaxy's reliance on hyperspace lanes and artificial shortcuts through reality. Those systems were fast, but brittle, dependent on external infrastructure, vulnerable to regulation, sabotage, and denial. Human engineers chose endurance. They built drives that pushed directly against spacetime, converting mass, time, and patience into motion. They were slower by Council standards, brutally inefficient on paper, but they never failed. Human ships no longer needed lanes, gates, or permissions. If space existed, they could cross it. They didn't arrive suddenly. They arrived inevitably. Unbreakable shields followed. Not elegant energy veils meant for brief engagements, but layered abominations of redundancy, fields nested within fields, reinforced by mass and adaptive algorithms. Human shields didn't attempt to negate damage. They absorbed it, redistributed it, learned from it. Each impact fed data back into the system, refining responses in real time. Kinetic force was spread until it died. Energy bled away into harmless radiation. Every hit made the shield better prepared for the next. Hull plating thickened until ships resembled moving continents. Armor was grown, replaced, and grown again. Vital systems were buried beneath ecosystems, farms, reservoirs, fabrication bays, medical wards, so that even catastrophic damage could be endured. Human ships stopped being vehicles. They became habitats that moved. Fleets were built, but not for conquest. There were no banners painted on hulls. No heroic naming conventions. Ships were designated by role and redundancy. Ark-class vessels safeguarded populations. Foundry fleets manufactured replacements mid-transit. Defense lattices operated as mobile terrain rather than aggressive spearheads. Every loss was anticipated. Every function replaceable. Every ship expendable, except the people inside. Weapons existed, but they were tools, not symbols. Interdiction fields. Area denial arrays. Precision null systems designed to remove threats cleanly and permanently. Humanity did not design weapons to inspire fear. They designed them to end danger. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Artificial intelligence, once restricted, once feared, was rebuilt with ruthless clarity. No masters. No gods. Partners only. Systems were designed to assume error rather than perfection, betrayal rather than loyalty, failure rather than success. Human oversight was mandatory. Human responsibility absolute. Biology advanced alongside steel. Human physiology adapted quietly. Radiation tolerance increased. Cellular repair accelerated. Immune systems became aggressive, self-updating networks. Humans didn't become visibly different. They became harder to kill. Generations grew up inside this preparation. Children learned fabrication and repair alongside language and mathematics. Emergency response became basic education. Knowing how to keep something running was as fundamental as reading. This was not militarization. It was survival literacy. Beyond human space, the galaxy remained unaware. The Council was busy managing politics, suppressing dissent, and congratulating itself on stability. Data contradicting humanity's collapse was filtered, reinterpreted, or discarded. It was easier not to look. And so the galaxy never saw the fleets forming beyond known maps. Never saw the engines that ignored borders. Never saw the shields that endured forces capable of shattering moons. Never saw a civilization that had stopped chasing approval and started building permanence. By the time the silence became noticeable, by the time anyone wondered why human space was still there, humanity was no longer preparing to return. They were preparing to endure anything the universe might send their way. Then a new enemy appeared. It did not arrive with ceremony or warning. There were no diplomatic probes, no declarations of intent. One moment the outer systems were quiet, the next they were screaming, and then they were gone. The first world fell in less than a cycle. Long-range sensors detected massive distortions beyond mapped space, followed by fleets that ignored established lanes and navigational physics entirely. The enemy ships were vast and asymmetrical, grown rather than built, their hulls alive with shifting structures that adapted even as they were being observed. They called themselves the Dominion. Worlds fell. Council defense fleets mobilized too late, arriving only to find debris fields where cities and stations had once existed. Orbital platforms were dismantled and fed into colossal processing constructs. Moons were cracked open for resources. Atmospheres burned as a byproduct of efficiency, not malice. The Dominion did not wage war. They harvested. Species were enslaved. Survivors were catalogued with mechanical indifference. Those with technical knowledge were implanted with neural control nodes and forced to maintain Dominion warforms. Soldiers were chemically altered, stripped of identity, and driven back into battle as disposable shock units. Entire populations were reduced to labor inputs in a vast, expanding machine. Those deemed unnecessary were erased. Refugees fled into council space carrying stories no one wanted to believe, of neural chains, forced assimilation, and worlds converted into processing hubs. Some spoke of entire cultures reduced to biological material, their histories ending not with destruction, but with repurposing. The galaxy panicked. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions that stretched on for cycles. Representatives shouted over one another, demanding action while assigning blame. Ancient species argued over jurisdiction. Younger ones begged for protection. Military blocs refused to commit fleets without guarantees of reimbursement and command authority. The Council argued while systems burned. Votes were proposed. Votes were delayed. Votes were vetoed. Coalitions formed on paper and collapsed in practice. Fleets mobilized too slowly, bound by protocols designed for controlled conflict, not extinction. Every decision required consensus, and consensus arrived too late to matter. When Council fleets finally engaged the Dominion in force, the results were catastrophic. Entire armadas vanished. Flagships were torn apart mid-transmission. The Dominion sacrificed ships freely, learning from every exchange, adapting faster than Council tacticians could respond. Weapons that had once decided wars barely slowed them. Within a few short cycles, the truth became undeniable. The Council was losing. Worse, they had no strategy left. That was when analysts noticed something unsettling. On Dominion expansion maps, there was a void. A vast region of space they did not enter. Not fortified. Not contested. Simply avoided. Advance vectors curved away from it. Probes altered course without explanation. Entire fleets diverted as if responding to a threat no one could see. That region bordered the space humanity had once occupied. The realization hit the Council chamber like vacuum exposure. Humanity. A species isolated, sanctioned, and written off as finished. A civilization the Council had pushed into silence and then forgotten. And yet, something about them had caused an empire that devoured stars to hesitate. Reluctantly, desperately, the Council turned to the name they had never planned to speak again. Dormant channels were reactivated. Deprecated frequencies restored. Messages were drafted with extreme care, acknowledging past disagreements, emphasizing shared extinction-level risk, appealing to unity and mutual survival. The first message went unanswered. So did the second. Worlds continued to fall. Finally, stripped of pride and pretense, the Council broadcast a single, unfiltered transmission across every channel humanity had ever used. "We need your help." The reply came minutes later. Not from an ambassador. Not from a politician. From a calm, steady voice identified only as command. "We know," the voice said. "We've been observing." Relief swept the chamber. Councilors spoke at once, offering restored rights, full reintegration, shared authority, anything to secure humanity's aid. The human voice cut through the noise. "You isolated us. You revoked our rights. You expected us to collapse," command said. "We didn't. What's happening now is not our responsibility." Panic surged. "If the Dominion wins," a counselor pleaded, "humanity will fall as well." There was a pause, long enough to be terrifying. "Yes," command replied. "Eventually." Hope flared. "So you'll help." "We didn't say that," the voice answered. "We said we understand the threat." Council displays changed. Data flooded the chamber. Dominion logistics, behavioral models, Structural weaknesses mapped with disturbing precision. Entire campaigns already simulated. Failure points identified. Casualty projections calculated down to decimals. Humanity hadn't just been watching. They had been preparing. "We will engage the Dominion," Command said at last. "Because extinction-level threats do not respect borders." Relief washed through the Council. "But understand this," the voice continued, colder now. "This is not a rescue. This is containment." The transmission ended. And as Dominion fleets closed in on the heart of the galaxy, the Council finally understood the truth behind humanity's disappearance. They hadn't vanished because they were weak. They had stepped back to prepare for something far worse than the galaxy had ever imagined. The Council expected forgiveness. They believed desperation rewrote history. That when extinction loomed large enough, old grievances would dissolve into gratitude. They told themselves humanity would be angry, but thankful. Ready to return. Ready to obey. Ready to help. What they found instead was resolve. When the human channels finally reopened, the council chambers erupted in controlled chaos. Delegates spoke over one another, rushing to offer what had once been denied: restored rights, permanent council seats, shared command authority, reparations quietly approved without debate. Humanity listened. Then they answered calmly. "We will decide when to act." The words hit harder than any refusal. Council representatives protested immediately. Time was running out. Every delay meant another system falling, another species enslaved. They demanded schedules, fleet movements, assurances, anything to cling to. They were given nothing. "Urgency did not save you," the voice continued, identified only as command. "It blinded you. We will not make the same mistake." The transmission ended. Fear spread through the chamber like vacuum through a breach. For the first time in galactic history, survival did not rest with ancient authority or political consensus. It rested with a species the Council had once dismissed as insignificant, and that species was not rushing. Far beyond charted space, something stirred. In regions long marked as empty, where gravity maps blurred and sensors returned meaningless noise, human constructs awakened. Structures seeded during the first days of isolation came online in flawless synchronization, as if responding to a signal that had never been transmitted. Foundries ignited. Stars were tapped, not drained, not destroyed, but shaped. Their output redirected into controlled torrents of energy feeding massive frameworks wrapped in reinforced spacetime fields. Fleets that had never existed in Council records aligned along vectors no known doctrine had ever predicted. Soon after, space itself began to tremble. Not from hyperspace ruptures. Not from weapons fire. From strain. Across the galaxy, sensors screamed as localized distortions appeared in synchronized patterns light-years apart. Reality flexed, stabilized, then flexed again, like a structure being tested under load. Humanity was not mobilizing. They were initializing. The Council finally understood the difference. Whatever humanity was preparing was not a desperate response to the Dominion. It was something planned long ago, refined in silence, and held in reserve for threats that justified its cost. The Dominion qualified. Whether the Council did, was no longer part of the equation. Humanity had not returned seeking forgiveness. They had not emerged to reclaim lost status or demand restitution. They had returned because something existed that threatened continuity. And they would act, not when the Council begged, not when panic peaked, but when the outcome was already decided. As space continued to tremble and human systems aligned beyond sight, one truth settled heavily over the Council chambers. Humanity was no longer asking if they should intervene. They were deciding how much of the galaxy would still exist when they were done. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. There was no warning, no hyperspace flare, no detectable energy surge, no distortion the Council's instruments could interpret in time. One moment, Dominion armadas filled the void, advancing with the certainty of a force that had never been stopped. The next moment, humanity was there. Space itself seemed to accept their presence rather than react to it. Massive constructs unfolded into reality as if they had always existed just beyond perception. Fleets arranged themselves instantly, every vessel locking into position with mathematical precision. They were massive. They were precise. They were unstoppable. Arc ships the size of moons drifted into defensive formation, their surfaces layered with shields that bent light and gravity alike. Lattice platforms stretched across entire approach vectors, transforming open space into controlled terrain. Foundry fleets anchored behind the line, already fabricating assets that had not yet been lost. Humanity did not charge. They waited. Dominion sensors struggled to classify what they were seeing. No recognizable signatures. No familiar propulsion markers. Targeting solutions collapsed into static. It was as if the enemy had arrived outside the rules the Dominion understood. Then a single message crossed every channel. Unencrypted. Unmistakable. Universal. Stand down. The Dominion answered with annihilation. Their fleets surged forward, unleashing weapons designed to break suns and crack worlds. Entire formations were sacrificed to overwhelm the human line. Space burned white as energy storms tore through the void. Human shields flexed and held. Energy dispersed into layered fields and vanished. Kinetic force bled away, momentum dying mid-flight. Attacks that had erased civilizations simply failed to register as meaningful damage. Human ships did not retreat. They did not advance. They did not respond emotionally at all. Then humanity acted. Not with fury. With correction. Zones of space hardened. Dominion vessels slowed, then stopped entirely, caught in regions where physics no longer cooperated. Propulsion failed. Weapons systems went dark. Entire armadas froze mid-charge, suspended like insects in amber. Human counterfire began. It was not a barrage. It was removal. Dominion ships vanished one by one, erased by localized null events that left no debris, no explosion, just absence. Command vessels disappeared first. Coordination nodes second. Every strike removed something essential, calculated and final. The Dominion attempted to adapt. They always did. But there was nothing to adapt to. Human tactics did not escalate or change. They remained constant, as if the battle's outcome had already been determined before the first shot was fired. Retreat vectors collapsed before they could be used. Reinforcements never arrived. The Dominion's distributed command intelligence, an entity believed to span dimensions, went silent without warning. No death cry. No collapse. It simply stopped. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Across the galaxy, Council sensors struggled to process what they were witnessing. Battles that should have lasted centuries concluded in minutes. Systems once doomed to fall went quiet, untouched by occupation. Human fleets did not pursue. They powered down. A final transmission followed, brief and absolute. The threat has been neutralized. Do not pursue remnants. And then, withdrawal. Space folded gently. Human vessels vanished as cleanly as they had arrived. Physics relaxed. Reality resumed its familiar shape, leaving behind silence, and survivors who could scarcely comprehend what had saved them. The Galactic Council sat in stunned disbelief. Because at last, they understood the truth. Humanity had not fought a war. They had executed a solution. And the galaxy would never again mistake human silence for absence, or human restraint for weakness. The Council tried to reclaim control. In the aftermath of the Dominion's sudden annihilation, emergency decrees flooded the chambers. Borders were reaffirmed. Authority reasserted. Committees were formed to oversee reconstruction, defense coordination, and future existential contingencies. The Council spoke as if the crisis had proven its necessity, as if order had survived because of its guidance. It was too late. The galaxy remembered. Worlds remembered the silence while they burned. Species remembered the votes that never passed. Civilizations remembered who argued and who acted. The Council still had fleets. They still had laws. They still had ancient halls filled with echoes of power. But belief had shifted, and belief was the foundation of authority. Humanity did not step forward to rule. They refused every offer. Permanent seats. Supreme command. Emergency governance over liberated systems. Each proposal was received, acknowledged, and declined with the same quiet consistency. We are not interested in ruling, the final human transmission stated. Rulership creates dependence. Dependence creates collapse. Instead, humanity shared knowledge. Stabilization arrays capable of repairing planetary damage. Defensive frameworks designed to prevent, not provoke. Infrastructure blueprints that favored redundancy over elegance. They helped rebuild worlds, and then they left. Humanity did not replace the Council. They rendered it optional. Across the galaxy, doctrines changed. Species stopped assuming someone else would protect them. Defense replaced prestige. Preparation replaced complacency. The lesson was simple and terrifying. Survival outsourced is survival delayed. And humanity, they faded back into the dark. Not hiding. Not isolated. Waiting. Human space remained distant and undefined, its borders unmapped, its presence felt rather than seen. Their fleets were not stationed along trade routes or core systems. They existed beyond known space, where sensors strained and certainty failed. Watching. Listening. Enduring. The Council never sanctioned humanity again. They never dared. Because the galaxy now understood a truth that could not be unlearned. Humanity did not need to rule to matter. They did not need permission to protect existence. They did not need gratitude to act. They had survived abandonment. They had endured isolation. They had ended an extinction-level war without becoming conquerors. And that changed everything. So when the stars finally grew quiet again, and the Dominion became a footnote rather than a destiny, one certainty spread, spoken softly between worlds, etched into strategic archives, remembered by every species that had watched the darkness come and go. If darkness rises again, if something ancient, merciless, or unimaginable reaches for the galaxy, humanity will be there. Not as rulers, not as saviors demanding praise, but as the ones who learned, in silence and isolation, how to endure long enough to stop it.